Hello, everyone, and welcome to Infotech's panel discussion on best practices for managing split funding and more. So happy you're all here. I will be your host today. I'm Jen Basner, and I'm the Assistant Director of Product Management with Infotech. I have worked with the Appia team for about 9 years in various roles such as customer support, trainer, business analyst, and product management. And I'm going to allow the panelists to introduce themselves, so we'll pass it over to Ron Gant.
Thank you, Jen. I'm Ron Gant. I'm a senior business consultant for Infotech. I've been in the industry for way too many decades, go back to some of the 3D modeling and all like that. But thank you very much for letting me be a part of it, Jen. And I'm based in Huntsville, Alabama.
I believe, am I next, Jen?
Yeah, Nikki next.
Okay, I'm Nikki Stan. I am the secondary roads engineer. I'm with the DOT, Iowa DOT, Local Systems Bureau. So I work mostly with the counties on all of their funding and programming stuff, but I've also been the one that's just helped kind of implement Appia and the use of it for all of our counties now, and for any of our cities that are choosing to use it in Iowa.
Hey, Dan, you muted.
Out of our Cincinnati office, Dan Todd with Primate. I've been working for 8 years now, lead project engineer for our office, and work mostly about 90% of my work is with LPA clients. And so I use Appia in the funding split functionality for just about every project to help all of our locals here with their funding needs.
Great. Thank you. Thank you all so much for being here today. We will go ahead and get started. We'll start with the housekeeping before we go into the webinar. So for today's presentation, you will be muted. However, I do want to encourage everyone to use the Q&A feature. You'll see that button titled Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and then we'll address some questions during the Q&A session at the end. So I'll definitely encourage all of the participants to add their questions down there. If for any reason you have to leave today's presentation, or if you'd like to rewatch or share, we'll be sending a recording out of the discussion once it's available. And we'll include any Q&A that we did not get to today. All right, let's get to it. For our overview, we have a lot to cover today. So we're going to kick things off with Ron, who will provide a high-level overview of the current funding landscape for infrastructure projects. Next, I will demo how Appia drives the ability to manage project funding successfully, and how funding caps functionality helps to prioritize how funding is used within the projects. We'll end things with a discussion where our panelists will share best practices and success stories around how they've leveraged Appia to bring efficiency around the funding setup and reporting for their infrastructure projects. It's going to be really amazing to hear firsthand from the consultant perspective and the local programs perspective. This will also help you decide on how you might make changes to improve your project funding setup now, or if you're not using it yet, get you interested in starting to use Appia's funding feature. So we'll start off with Ron, and Ron, take it away.
Thank you very much, Jen. And I'm going to be relatively quick because Jen's going to show the important stuff. And of course, the success stories that others are having is equally as important. But as we look at the funding landscape, the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act, or the Bipartisan Transportation Act, whichever term you want to use for it, the IIJA abbreviation, has been a tremendous boost for our economy and for our infrastructure. The funding in that is just awesome. There's a lot of stuff put together for federal, state, local infrastructure projects. And states have even stepped up and created some individual fundings as well. Many states have done nickel penny taxes type stuff to increase funding, all with that. And here in North Alabama, where I live, in Huntsville, Huntsville is booming and growing leaps and bounds. Now the largest city inside of Alabama, surprisingly. But that puts a heavy tax on our infrastructure for sure. And one of the things that Huntsville started doing is funding projects, or going to the agency, DOT, and say, look, we'll throw in, a certain percentage if you'll move our project up the list so that we can improve our infrastructure here. And it has been successful. Some projects that were further down the list are now active and going on in North Alabama here. The other agencies, local agencies, go, what's happening to us? But it actually frees up more money for the local agencies, because now cities that can afford it are chipping in and throwing money in with the state and federal funds to do that. And even in South Carolina, they came up with what I think is a very interesting way, because your local governments are always wanting to know how can we better control our funds. So South Carolina implemented what they call a penny tax. And that penny tax is for the local governments to look at and say, okay, I have a vehicle by which I can add a penny tax. And then the DOT or the state allows the local government to control that funding and use that on their projects. So that, really creates, multiple funding opportunities. But when you get multiple funding opportunities, then being able to see who is providing the fundings, where the funding is being provided, whether it be based upon an area or a particular infrastructure asset that the funding is going to have, it really increases that amount of bookkeeping that the consultant and local government have to do in order to be able to get this funding and apply this funding. But at the same time, people want to know what's going on, and the transparency has to increase as well. And the tools that Jen's going to show you really is going to help you understand how you can do that. Next slide, please. And with a lot of this being generated from the top, from the federal government, FHWA has really stepped up their game. They really have. They started the Everyday Counts program a dozen years ago, and started out just trying to get people to look at innovation, look at ways that they could do the projects better, faster, more efficiently, and stuff like that. And they've been doing almost quarterly summits and stuff like that in order to be able to educate local and state governments. And there's many different innovation fundings available there. If you go to the FHWA innovation site, you'll see a list of almost a spreadsheet of almost a dozen different type programs that state and local government can participate in. And they even put in their spreadsheet who this funding is available for. And so you see things like STIC, like AID, like ARM, and of course for the for the state governments, the ADCMS there. And there is a federal share going into that and that innovation. I really encourage you to visit the FHWA site and get familiar with that, because there's a lot of help there. But it all means a lot of different sources, a lot of different bookkeeping that you got to do. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jen and let Jen show you just how this can be applied.
Thanks, Ron. Yeah, that was great. We heard from you, there is a significant drive to invest in the infrastructure improvements in our communities. That's plain and simple. And with that comes a requirement to monitor, keep track of where the dollars are being spent. There's a few important steps on how to set that up in Appia. And the main piece is to set it up from the start, allocating the funding to the appropriate work, prioritizing which source to use. This will only make things that much easier as the projects progress to report on what you need. With that said, next I will share how Appia's funding feature can help with some of these funding needs. 3 parts, I'll break that into. The first piece will be a simple funding setup. The second will be exploring a newly added feature around funding caps to help prioritize sources within a fund package. We're going to focus on federal funds for that example. And finally, what happens when an additional grant comes in while the project is underway. So just a reminder, this is a very high level demo. It's only going to scratch the surface. Appia is capable of much, much more. So please, if you haven't started using Appia's funding feature, we'll provide some resources and just get in touch with us and we'll be happy to help. With that being said, I will go ahead and start the demo. All right. So just to speed up the demo a little bit, I did already create a few projects. One is in the new phase and one is in progress or under construction. Here's on my projects page, I will navigate to the new project and I'm in my project overview. When setting up a project in Appia, the first piece is to bring in your project items. And I've already done that. And I broke out my items by roads. There's 3 roads, and I have those sectioned out by roadway A, B, and C, just for simplicity. There's many different ways you can set up your items within Appia. So the next step is to set up your funding. We're going to set up some packages along with sources, and then start allocating these items to those packages. And that is where the importance comes in on setting this up from the start. It's only going to make everything much easier as the project progresses. So we'll go ahead and click on our funding tab on the left. And as you see, there is a default fund package and default fund source. So our first example, I will add 2 packages and federal, state, local source to add to those packages. We'll go ahead into the edit mode here. We'll start with a participation and a non-participation package. So we'll go ahead and add that second package. Now, non-participation will be the local funds. So we'll add federal, state, and local as our sources. And as I mentioned, the non-participation will be funded 100% by the local source. This project might have an 80-20 split for federal and state, so we'll go ahead and enter that. So our participation fund package has an 80-20 split between federal and state, so all work performed and paid from the items that are assigned to the participation package will automatically be split between those sources. And then the non-participation, which is 100% local. Now, once I have this set up, I will save it. And you see at the top is your snapshot of your fund packages, and the dollars have updated based on the allocation. So you'll notice participation and non-participation. Non-participation doesn't yet have any items allocated, so that's our next step. We're going to go into the item section below and start working on allocating the sections, the line items, or splitting it between multiple packages. So we can do that in a few ways. At each section, you have the ability to associate it to the entire section to a package. As an example, you can also come down to each individual line item and select the correct package that this line item will be associated with. Or you can split it between multiple packages by quantity. As an example, 50 and 50. Or you can toggle the dollar at the top and allocate specific dollar values within each package. For this project, we're going to keep roadway A and roadway B as participation. So it'll be a federal, state funded 2 roadways, 80-20 split. But roadway C will be locally funded. So we'll go ahead and change the entire section to non-participation. All right. And then save it. And now we're back to our funding page, and you've seen, you now see the allocation update appropriately. Non-participation, the entire section of roadway C is $156,000. Okay, so that is an example of a very simplistic, two fund packages with a few sources and allocating your project items. The next example would be, we want to use $100,000 of federal funds and prioritize the $100,000 over the federal and state 80-20 split. So that'll be the next example here. Come in here. Now we have our packages, participation and non-participation. And we'll go right into the package itself. And this is new functionality, and this is where our funding cap functionality comes in. So we see how I set it up with the simple example was an 80-20 split. But I'd like to allocate $100,000 of federal funds first, and then go into an 80-20 split for federal and state within the participation package. So I'm going to set that up now. We'll go into our priority. And the first thing I'll want to do is remove the state, because we're going to allocate 100% of federal funds up to $100,000. And we'll add state back in just a moment. So now we have federal, and we'll go ahead and add a funding cap. And again, $100,000. And the next priority will roll into a federal state 80-20 split. So we'll go ahead and select the federal. And once we save, we see funding priority 1, all work performed and paid up to $100,000 will pull from the federal fund, the federal source. Then it will roll into priority 2 once it meets that $100,000 cap. So we'll set up priority 2. Now we want to add that state source back in. And we want to allocate the 80-20 split. And now we see the allocation update. Then we save. And you can hover over here. It indicates the funding cap of $100,000. And we'll go back out to our funding page. And now you see this icon as well, indicating that the package has funding caps. You can click on the package link, and you'll see the snapshot of your priority setup. So all work performed that from the items that are assigned the participation package will be federally funded up to $100,000 and then roll into the 80-20 split. Okay, so we just went over a simple package setup, and then we prioritized funding for the federal dollars. Next, we're going to go into a project that is in progress. So I will navigate to my under construction project, and I land on my project overview. I have already posted items into a daily work report, actually 2, from the participation package and the non-participation package, and made a payment. So we'll navigate over to the payment. And we have my payment number 1. And we've updated one of the reports, which is the invoice by fund. We know that reporting is crucial in this project and sharing to our external stakeholders around funding and where the dollars are being spent. For the invoice by fund, we have the ability to report on fund packages and fund sources, and then you can tailor how your report should look. We'll run the report. And this shows the non-participation fund, which is our local. So roadway 3 has had some work on it. We've made a payment of $1,340. We scroll down and we see our participation fund. So items posted within the daily report and approved. And we have an $8,009.70 payment. And as we set up, we have $100,000 coming out of our federal fund first. So that's why you don't see state here yet, because up to $100,000, once it does, then we'll see that state fund start accumulating dollars. Okay, so this third example is, let's say a grant comes in while the project's under construction. And you need to pause where your local funds are. We know that we already made a payment of $1,340. We want to pause the local funds and have the grant be used for roadway C, sorry. So we'll go over to funding. And again, this is new functionality. This is under construction project. And I see my non-participation. And I have my federal, state, and local sources. Now we have a grant that came in. We'll add the grant in and save. And now we see federal, state, local, and grant. So now let's set up that scenario. And we'll go right into the non-participation package. So we have 100% coming out of local. We want to insert the grant here. So we want to pause where we have already paid out, start using the grant funds. And now we know the grant came in at $10,000 as an example. We'll go ahead and edit and add that funding cap of $10,000. Once the $10,000 is used or depleted, then we'll roll back into local funds. So now we see we've already made a payment of $1,340. Now any work performed on roadway C, the grant will be used up to $10,000 and then roll back into the local funds. And we'll come out to the funding page, and now you see this icon where it's indicating that the package has funding caps, and you can select and see that snapshot at the top. And just to reiterate the reporting functionality, the new payment report invoice by fund has been updated to allow you to break down the sources. In addition, we're going to hear some really great example from Nikki Stin during the panel interview around how Iowa locals are using the API to send payment information over to Workday. So it's pretty exciting. Yeah. All right, well, now that you saw the demo, hopefully you all like that and had some good examples. We'll get started with our panel discussion. And again, I encourage all the attendees to use the Q&A feature. As we listen to this discussion, any additional questions you want to ask the panelists, we'll get to towards the end. And we'll go ahead and get started. So as we heard earlier from Ron about project funding landscape, followed by the Appia funding feature, and how Appia can help with the various funding scenarios and reporting. Let's start with Dan. Can you share the challenges you have experienced in managing project funding and how you and your team have addressed them?
Yeah, that's a good question, Jen. So my perspective on how I'm going to respond to these questions is from the consultant perspective. So I do work with a variety of clients who have all dealt with funding splits their own individual ways in the past. So that's main challenge number one, is combining a lot of different means and methods of dealing with it. The good thing is I introduced these clients to Appia, which really does streamline the process. Many are surprised that this Appia feature is available, and it really prevents a lot of Excel usage, which a lot of clients like. It also helps them prepare for their reimbursement requests for each individual pay estimate. And then the last thing I'd like to add is there's flexibility within the funding landscape on Appia. You can prioritize the features with the new caps that Jen just showed. You can identify and isolate different groups of work items, maybe a bridge grouping of items, a safety grouping of items, and then your pavement at the end of the project as a different funding source. So you can identify the packages and sources for all of those different work items, as well as if you have different geographic fund sources per se for a project at a county line or a township line, you can split one pay item into multiple fund sources And so you're over on the township side and you're paving, that money is going to be paid by the township. You're on the county side, that's going to be paid by the county. So there's a lot of flexibility within the the funding split feature on Appia.
Thanks, Dan. I'll jump in and kind of give our perspective. So again, I'm with the Local Systems Bureau at the Iowa DOT. So our bureau oversees local public agency projects, so city, county conservation board projects that utilize state aid, federal aid, farm to market funding. For those of you that don't know, because it's a little unique to Iowa, farm to market funding is just a special subset of Iowa road use tax funding. So it's kind of like local funding, but has more functionality. So often only certain items or activities within your projects are eligible for a given type of federal, state, or farm to market funding. So we have to ensure that all that funding is used on the applicable and only eligible items. So to accomplish that, we have field staff that go through the project records. They look at the locations and the quantities of each item that were placed. If the items aren't separated into divisions or sections based on funding sources, that checking becomes really hard and very intensive. So to combat that, we've provided guidance on how to set up divisions and plans according to the funding sources. And then additionally, the use of Appia has just made it much easier for quantity tracking and documenting, and our folks actually are given read-only access to all of the local public agency projects in Appia, so we can see also what's going on with those projects. And so then often during the course of that work, the additional work becomes necessary that maybe doesn't qualify for federal funds or state funds or whatever your main source of funding was. And so that work needs to get put into a non-participating package, kind of like Jen showed. So Appia makes it really easy for us to set up a non-participating funding package to stick those items or extra work into.
Can I address a question to Nikki and Dan? And either one of you or both of you can respond to. You know, as you see this federal funding, especially things going on with IIJA, because there are so many qualifiers they put on that. How much have you seen, if any, the complexity of reporting and funding change within an agency or an agency that you're contracted to, in case of Dan? Nikki?
Yeah, I can take that one first. You know, to be honest, Iowa has traditionally given a very good share of our federal aid funding to our local agencies. And so with each federal bill, our local agencies have kind of been used to all of the tracking and the rules. So while IIJA got maybe a little more complex with things, it wasn't a huge change for us, except for the fact that we had been doing a swap program, which means we were exchanging federal aid for state aid dollars. So everybody was kind of getting used to maybe a little less stringent reporting for about 3 years, and then we flipped back. So we have had to adjust a little bit to going back to making sure every single, I is dotted and T is crossed.
Just to piggyback off that in some way, our Ohio DOT has a pretty detailed local programs administration manual that details funding and material backup for a lot of projects and the locals that they're administrating. I think that's pretty kind of like the gold standard for reporting in that way, and so we haven't seen a whole lot of additional on top requirements, anything outside of the norm.
I would throw in though that discretionary grants do bring another dimension to that, so that has increased. We're seeing an increase in that.
Sounds like there are various funding scenarios that both consultant and local programs really have to deal with, and Appia sounds like it's a good fit for some or most of those scenarios. That's great. All right, then let's start with Nikki on this one. How do you ensure accurate allocation of project funds throughout the project?
Thanks, Jen. So for us, it really starts in the project development phase. So for the vast majority of city and county projects that we oversee, those are let here at the Iowa DOT. Very few are let locally. So when we let those at the DOT, the funding setups, so the plan divisions and the contract sections are all reviewed by our project development staff prior to the letting. We walk them through, we check the plan sets, we make sure everything's biddable and that it's sectioned off correctly for funding. So then when it's ready for letting, the project gets forwarded to our contracts and specifications bureau. And then that bureau puts in the funding packages and sources into their AASHTO pre-construction software that they use. And then what's really cool is we're able to export a .json file from the AASHTO pre-construction software. And it contains all of the funding package information, all the item information, every single detail that is used to set up the project in Appia. And so we export that and we then put it in Doc Express for our locals. They're able to just download it from Doc Express and upload it right into Appia, and it sets up their project in a matter of just a couple of minutes. It's really, truly awesome. Once that file is imported into Appia, all their funding is set up and ready to go for them basically. But then post-letting, it continues. So we have two types of kind of projects that we deal with as far as how we treat the funding reimbursements. So the first type is what we just call reimbursement projects. The local agencies pay out the contractors, and then they turn around and submit their pay vouchers and pay documentation to us. And we look through all those eligibilities, make sure everything's okay, and then we basically cut a check for reimbursement to them. The second is those farm to market funded projects that I talked about earlier. The Iowa DOT basically holds the checkbook for that account. And so we pay the contractors based on the pay vouchers that the local agencies produce in Appia for us. And then we make those payments through that account. And then we internally work on the reimbursement to reimburse that account. And so just payments are made at the county's direction, and then our finance department allocates and reimburses the funds back to that account.
I'll jump in a little bit of a different perspective, again, coming from the consultant. So Nikki talked a lot about the project development phase. The seat that I'm sitting in, we get the project handed to us at the time of bidding and award. So at that time, we get all of our information from the client, input it into Appia, and then we actually like to have a specific meeting with the client talking directly about funding splits. So that it's kind of two factors. One, we get it set up right at the beginning. And then two, involving the client in that setup process gives them a little bit of ownership into the process. And that helps them remain confident throughout the life of the project that you set it up correctly within Appia in the beginning. You shouldn't have any hiccups or anything throughout the life of the construction of the project. And ODOT has two formats for paying the contractor as well, either a direct pay or the reimbursement process, very similar to Iowa.
Thank you both. As you both described, there's a lot of efficiency gains from upfront preparation, and that includes collaborative discussions that Dan explained that builds the confidence and trust, review process that Nikki touched on, project setup. What other efficiencies have you uncovered by using Appia to help manage project funds through use of features like funding cap? I'm gonna start with Dan on this one.
Yeah, so the funding cap is a new feature. Part of the reason we're having this webinar today. We're excited to get our hands dirty with it and use it on projects going forward. On everything I've learned about it so far, it seems like it's going to eliminate a lot of secondary handwork that may have been needed in the past. The nice thing is when you have prioritized funding in the past, you would have to check each pay estimate. All right, our $1 million cap has hit. Well, we only spent half of this month's estimate to hit our cap. Then we have to manually track, okay, priority number 2, half of this pay estimate's now going to priority 2 and so forth. So really, we're excited that this feature is going to eliminate the need to track pennies in Excel, every single pay estimate until priority 1 spent, priority 2 spent, and so on. So excited to get to use that feature moving forward.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, we're kind of in the same boat and to just getting into the funding caps and priorities functionality. Our cities especially often have very complex funding situations that evolve over time. So we anticipate the ability to track and use each of those funding sources and adjust them as necessary is going to be really, really beneficial to especially our cities that have those complex situations. Also, many of our projects that utilize federal aid and state aid have limits on the amount of funding that come from those particular sources. And so we're excited to be able to enter those funding caps into Appia so that the Appia documentation matches exactly what our internal records and our internal financial systems show. Previously, we kind of have concerns about the records not matching. So that's another benefit. And then I also want to talk just a little bit about our automated payments. So for our farm to market funds, so those ones that we pay the contractor directly out of that fund for the counties, in January, we went live with automated payments. And what that means is our process, we use Workday for our financial system, and it reaches out to Appia via the API, and it pulls in all the data for the Appia payments straight into our Workday financial system. And so then all of that data contains funding package information. And so like participating or non-participating, our system knows whether it should pay it or not. And previously then our finance team had to enter every single quantity for every single bid item, every pay voucher manually into our system. You can imagine that creates a lot of typos and different situations and just a lot of time. So the ability to just pull pay information with the funding associated is a huge time savings for us and reduces a lot of errors too. Then just the last thing I wanted to touch on is just the payment settings in Appia surrounding the funding. So even just the setting that do not pay over, $50,000 over an item's amount saves us a huge amount of time because it just kind of cuts off those pay vouchers when a change order is required instead of having to have a lot of back and forth conversations when those situations happen.
That's great. I'm sure you both only touched on just a few of the benefits using Appia's funding feature and some of those settings and the API. The ones you've described are significant impact for you and your team. You mentioned changes as well. So let's talk about changes that may occur. How do you handle unexpected changes during or deviations in project funds?
Yeah, so I'll jump in. The funding cap and priority feature will definitely make it easier. But to date, we've just basically had to manually track any change in any funding, kind of, make a paper note, send an email, and then keep trying to follow up on it down the chain. So we actually recently had prohibited the inclusion of additional funding sources post-letting just because of the confusion and challenges and all that manual tracking.
Same way over here. Prior to this new feature, we were tracking everything secondary by hand. I am an engineer after all, so I do like numbers and Excel spreadsheets. But we're excited to utilize this funding cap feature to address any changes that happen during construction. And then just the last thing I'd like to add is a little plug-in for the Appia support team. If anything goes wrong on your project within Appia, need to undo something, change something, the support team is very responsive and very helpful, helping you get through whatever situation, whatever problem you're experiencing. So definitely, if you're using Appia, don't be shy to reach out to the support team.
That's a great shout out to our support team. They really are top notch and will help with any scenario that you come across. So thank you for acknowledging them. We heard from Ron earlier and in some of your answers that one of the most important portions of construction management is reporting, especially on project funds and work performed. Can you share how you report on project funds to external stakeholders?
Yeah, so again, as a consultant working for different municipalities, locals in the area, they have funding from all different sources. Federal funding that's run through ODOT, OPWC funding that's run through the Ohio Public Works Commission, local funding, and even our locals specifically. Some cities own their own utilities, so they have different funding codes for gas, sanitary, lighting, roadway, etc. So basically, most of our clients require the detailed payment section to be submitted with each pay application. And then at the bottom of that detailed payment report, the funding details is listed at the bottom for each of the funding sources. So what I do is I take that information, that data from the funding details, and I created just a real basic Excel sheet that lists them, and it lists previous spent to date, spent this pay estimate, and total spent to date. Takes 30 seconds to fill out each month, and on some projects, the clients have us fill out their reimbursement requests directly. So ODOT provides another Excel sheet with their splits 80-20, 70-30, 90-10. And then sometimes you'll have an additional 100% local. So either we take the data, fill it out directly for the client, or we take the data, hand it off to the client, to which they can very easily use the data to fill out their reimbursement requests.
Thanks, Dan. For our reimbursement style projects, so when the locals pay out the contractor and then we reimburse them, we have a form that the local agency fills out, what they've spent today, what's participating, what's not. They attach their documentation, and then we make that reimbursement. And then the proof of payment gets put into Doc Express for them too. I would mention that we're excited about this funding too, because we think that maybe through the API, we can start pulling some of this information from Appia directly to populate reimbursement requests instead of having to fill out an Excel sheet, but we're just getting started looking into that. So I would say that all of our external partners are the ones that are using Appia to enter all the project information and documentation. And so our reporting back to them is really just a matter of affirming to them that we have reimbursed what they've asked, or that we've paid what they've requested to be paid. And again, we just put that back into Doc Express for them to see that proof of payment.
Nikki brought up Doc Express, and that might be a little bit of a foreign expression for some of you, but Doc Express is a document routing tool that we provide with Appia. It's also available by itself, but it's included with Appia, the functionality there. And it really gives you that ability to, when you need to route a document for certain approvals and tracking that document, who has it, where it is, information like that. It's just additional functionality that you have that really provides a secure, safe, cloud-based solution for your document routing. So Doc Express is part of Appia. I'm glad you brought it up, Nikki. I think it's one of the hidden gems that we have in there.
Agreed. Doc Express is such a great tool in the entire process, and recently integrated with Appia, so just another plug in there. We talked about efficiency gains with project funding setup, saving time, and also handling changes. So let's pivot over to field use. How do your inspectors in the field benefit from all the preparation, project setup, project funding setup, and the benefits you've already described?
So yeah, I think having the funding package in Appia just allows for users to attribute the items to those packages when making item postings and doing change orders just very easily. So it's easy for them to separate out quantities for different divisions or different sections, make billing to other entities, like Dan mentioned, when it's on a joint, say, county city line or township line or something. It's just really easy to attribute the item to the right package. So you can just track those quantities exactly where you want them to be.
I would agree. Projects that have items that are separated by work groups for their funding sources, there's no additional work on the field staff, field inspectors. When they plug in a daily pay item on a daily work report, it automatically kicks it to the correct funding source based off your pre-project work and setting that up in Appia. And then the only difference when you have kind of geographic differences at the township or county line is when the inspector goes in and pays for a pay item on a daily work report, he or she just has to select, yes, this is part of this funding source, or yes, this is part of this funding source. So geographically speaking, it's pretty clear when you're known in the plans where you're at on the project. So just one additional step, but it's a very quick additional step. But it's nice that Appia gives the flexibility to manage different types of funding and different types of funding for different types of projects in kind of in that manner.
Right. Well, both of you really provided such great insights from both the consultant and local programs perspectives. To finalize our panel discussion, can you share any other best practices as it relates to managing project funds in specific regard to split funding?
I think the best advice that I can provide is that Appia is a program after all, and you put data into the program and you get data out of the program for reporting purposes. So you have to put good data in order to get good data out. And so spending that time at the beginning of the project to enter your funding splits accurately is the biggest key in my mind to getting it correctly set up so that it spits it out correctly through the life of the project. Now I will plug in for the new funding caps. I think that functionality is going to increase the flexibility of the program overall as a whole to where you are able to change stuff through the life of construction. And it essentially Appia funding splits, funding caps, it saves client time and money throughout the life of the project if we can fill that out quickly for them rather than sending them information and they have another Excel form for this, that, and whatever. So good data in equals good data out, and bad data in equals bad data out.
Yeah, making sure you guys can still hear me.
Yes.
I had to switch to my headphones. They are jackhammering right next to where I'm talking. So my advice would just be the KISS acronym, keep it simple, stupid. Just reduce the number of funding sources as much as you can, especially with funding sources that have very limited eligibility. Just makes it easier on everyone. And then set up the plan so that those divisions align with your funding packages. Don't kind of cross items between packages. Be sure to select the appropriate sections and funding packages in Appia. Like Dan mentioned, it's pretty quick, but sometimes maybe if something's in the second section of items, just make sure you keep scrolling to pick it out of the right section when you're posting it. And then just as a practice for us, what we found that works really well is we are now including a non-participating funding package stock on all of our projects in that JSON file that we use to set up everything. And so that that package is just already there ready to go, and it makes things pretty easy.
Well, thank you all so much for participating in this panel discussion. Such great information for all of us. We're going to get to our Q&A portion in just a moment. We have about 10 minutes left. But before we do, I'd like to briefly recap some highlights from our conversation. Okay. Project funding setup is a crucial part of construction management. And doing this, it sets the foundation for efficiency gains, reporting, handling changes during construction, revolving around funding allocation. We've heard that in so many of the examples today. We heard the complex funding situations described and how they evolve, change, and can be different from both the consultant and local programs perspectives. We heard a little bit about usable in the field, making it as easy as possible for the inspectors in the field to record the work being performed. Reporting, of course, reporting is always the highest crucial piece in construction management, and providing the reporting for federal, state, local funds and more to manage infrastructure projects and improving the communities is a huge piece of this. And I'll just mention again the important impact of IIJA funding and other types of funding towards the economic growth. Okay, we'll get to our Q&A. next. And as a reminder, we do have a couple questions in the Q&A already, but you'll see the Q&A at the bottom of your screen to ask any additional questions of our panelists, of Appia, functionality. And if we can't get to all the questions today, we will be sending that Q&A sheet out after in a few days. Okay. So our first question is, our team hasn't used Appia funding for our project yet, but would like to. So how can I learn more? I'll have one of my colleagues throw in a link when he can get that link for you. But that's a really great question. And we have some great information in the Knowledge Center. So he'll put that link in the chat for all the participants. And I encourage everyone to reach out to the customer support or their account manager. And we can certainly help set up your funding scenario, listen to your needs, and make sure that Appia can handle how that needs to be set up. All right. A question around, can you change the participation and non-participation titles to something like federal, state, local, and local? Absolutely. So when I was doing the demo, all of that is configurable, and it's just free text form. So you can enter your package ID or name however you see fit and however you would like to report on that. So you can do that. All right, a question for Iowa. Why did Iowa DOT crop its SWAP program? The Federal Exchange or SWAP program helps smaller agencies avoid violation of federal requirements.
Yeah, good question. We loved our SWAP program for the most part. I say we generally, the vast majority of us. What it really came down to with IIJA, there was so much funding that we had to have enough cash on hand to be able to provide the match to that funding, and we being the Iowa DOT. And because we had to have that cash on hand as the match, we didn't have the cash capacity to turn around and give that cash to the locals as swaps. So really just a cash flow issue. We all really liked it. We were sad to see it go.
All right, another question. Dan spoke of locals with multiple utility funds. My agency fits in this group. Can a sample Excel to Appia import be provided to us viewers?
Yeah, I can jump in. On our scenario, we are provided the name of the funding code, the local funding code, and then their ID code. It's usually like a 9 or 10 digit ID code. So what I do is, Jen mentioned on the first question, being able to change the participation, non-participation titles to something different. You can name those sources whatever you'd like, and then, or packages whatever you like. And then when you get into your sources, you can directly input your gas, sanitary, electric, street, etc. with those numbers. On the consultant side, we issue a PDF and an Excel. So I personally don't have the capability to directly attach that or link that to your system. It sounds like Iowa DOT may have something with API in the background. But for the most part, it's PDF and Excel exchanged via email or Doc Express, and then a little bit of manual entry on their part.
All right, we have somewhat of an enhancement request for the new feature. So for the funding cap while under construction, we saw we had to enter the dollar amount as the funding cap to stop paying from the current fund. So when I put in $1,340, it would be nice if we can tie funding cap to the payment already processed. So that way we already know that has been paid out. So I think that is a great request, and we can definitely look into that. Another one for Appia, can Appia handle project contingency funding from different sources? I'll start, but maybe Dan and Nikki could maybe chime in with some of their way of handling contingencies and matching it up to funding. But Many of our customers use contingency funding, contingency differently. Some introduce it as a line item with that total value, $20,000 contingency, and they can swap that with a different item via change order. There's other ways of doing that, so certainly reach out to us. We'd love to hear your setup or your needs, and we can work through that. But maybe Dan and Nikki might have a little bit more to add to that.
I'll jump in. I think the overall answer to your question is yes, that is very doable. It depends a little bit on how you prefer to approach it, because I think there's multiple ways of doing so, and it's just about finding how to implement that and make that fit for your needs. But overall, definitely yes. The answer to your question is yes.
Yeah, I would say for us, we honestly don't use contingencies a lot post-letting. We kind of figure them into our estimates pre-letting. But for some of our sources, like STBG funds, those traditionally they're awarded through our regional planning affiliations, and those are a capped amount you're not getting anymore. And so there's not really room to change those numbers. That's kind of a hard cap. But for things like our bridge funding, each of our counties has their own bridge account with their own funding, and they can kind of spend up to whatever's in their account on that project. So I would say the funding caps, if you had a cap but then needed to increase it because something came up, I think that's very doable with the new feature. You can just go in and edit that. That would be how I would see us using it. But again, we just don't do a lot with contingencies post-letting.
Great. All right, well, we have time for one more question. We have one more question left, and then one funny question, which I would like to read out loud. So one question around Appia. So if a work item, pay item overruns the original bid award quantities, does Appia provide an alert for that overrun? So Appia does have overruns listed in the change order at the very top. It depends on your settings as well. So how do you want to pay on overruns would be in your project settings. And based on those settings, you will see the information on your overruns on your change order. So you can easily add those overruns. You will see the overrun on your pay estimates, and it's withholding the payment. We don't have any type of like alert that you normally see at the top of the page, with a bell or things like that. So definitely would love to hear more. So reach out to our customer support with any recommendations as well. And then the last question is just funny, but quick question. Can we get a jackhammering solo before we sign off? Because the roof is getting redone at Nikki's office.
Yeah, I apologize, everyone. It was good for a while until it wasn't. Now there's a sledgehammer, maybe, so I can't provide one on demand. But so sorry about that. But I was going to jump in on Jen's last question too. I think there is a report to an Appia that can be run to show all the overruns too, if that's of any use to anyone. So sorry for no solo.
Great. We are out of time. I do see another question came into chat, so we will get to that question and send that out via email in a few days for sure. And I will go ahead and close that. So just a reminder, if you're already using Appia, you know that everything we've covered in this webinar starts with good documentation, project setup, effective collaboration. We heard multiple times. We also like to add in a newer integration by integrating Appia with field maps. We're geo-enabling the construction data now. This will create a streamlined workflow for data visualization. This integration supports comprehensive reporting efforts, improved transparency, and cross-departmental collaboration. So if you're interested, visit the URL below or contact us to learn more about that. And I just want to thank everyone again for joining us, all of the attendees, the panelists, Nikki, Dan, and Ron, your time today, sharing all your knowledge. We definitely really appreciate that. So if you're ready to explore how Appia can work for you, if you haven't explored Appia, please visit infotechinc.com/Appia. reach out to us. And again, have a great afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us.